Week 10 has just finished up, and that means we need to dive into those Dynasty waiver wires to find any players that could add value either to our actual starting lineups for the remainder of the year or for our rosters to potentially add value or for potential future trades later on down in the season. So let's get right into the video. As I say every single week, I pull actual data from actual rosters from Dynasty leagues, run through safe leagues on myfantasyleague.com to help guide me to find players who might actually be available in y'all's Dynasty leagues. So any data or any rostership percentage data that I do reference in this video is from that data set. First, let me give you a handful of names that could be available in your Dynasty waiver wires. Most likely they are already rostered, but just in case, just go double check because these guys are worth an immediate add if they are still available. And that includes Jeremy McNichols, running back for the Tennessee Titans, Devonta Freeman, running back for the Baltimore Ravens, Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the New England Patriots, James Washington, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Jamal Agnew, wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's get started with the first waiver wire ad that I think could be very valuable to your rosters here in the very near future and is available in basically every single Dynasty league, like 100% of Dynasty leagues out there. Patrick Taylor, the running back for the Green Bay Packers, is probably available to you. He is the new RB2 on the Green Bay Packers team, the only other running back on the Green Bay Packers behind A.J. Dillon after Aaron Jones went down with a knee injury and left in the Seahawks game and was a supposed sprained MCL. So if that is the case, that is probably a week-to-week injury. So if Aaron Jones does miss significant time, Patrick Taylor slides in as the RB2 behind A.J. Dillon on the Packers. And if you don't know who Patrick Taylor is, that's fine. A lot of people might not actually know who he is, but he is a second-year running back out of Memphis who had a pretty fantastic breakout season back with Memphis in 2018 as the running back 2 behind Darrell Henderson. He had over 1,100 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns on 200 carries. Just another one of those players that Memphis has continued to churn out at the running back position. And unfortunately for Taylor, he suffered a Liz Frank injury that completely derailed his entire 2019 senior season and then was signed as an undrafted free agent by the Green Bay Packers after the 2020 NFL draft and worked through that injury all last year without actually playing, and then is now on the practice squad, but then was activated earlier this month to the Green Bay Packers active roster and then got his first official snaps and rush attempts in the NFL in this last week's game. So Taylor is a really interesting player because of that production from Memphis, not to mention the fact that he is, 6'2", almost 220 pounds, ran a pretty respectable 4.57 40-yard dash, and he has experience in backfields where he is more of the RB2 or more congested backfields. And the Packers organization, or at least the team and how they've been utilizing Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, have shown that they are comfortable utilizing more than one running back and they want more than one player to be the focal point of the offense. And I expect A.J. Dillon to be the main workhorse on this team if Aaron Jones were to miss time and get the majority of the rush attempts. But Patrick Taylor could slot in and be kind of a complimentary back or maybe get a little bit of the receiving workload as well. I don't expect him to be a guy that you just throw right into your starting lineup, but he is really, really interesting to me as the RB2 on the Packers, not to mention the fact that if anything were to happen to A.J. Dillon while Aaron Jones is also still out, Patrick Taylor could actually see starting snaps on the Green Bay Packers, which would be very, very valuable for fantasy football. So he's definitely the biggest add for me this week at the running back position. And like I said, is available in basically 100% of Dynasty leagues out there. So go out and check him out and see if you can add him to your roster. The next player I want to highlight is Foreman, the running back for the Tennessee Titans, who is available in nearly 30% of Dynasty leagues out there still. And I know after the Derrick Henry injury, and then there was the news of Adrian Peterson visiting with the Titans and then eventually signing with them in the same day, everybody just kind of flocked right to Adrian Peterson, myself included, and we mostly dismissed the signing news of Foreman as well. But it has been over the past couple of weeks, the 2 weeks that Derrick Henry's been out, Foreman looked better than Adrian Peterson in last week's game and then was actually given a little bit more of a workload and had 11 carries and 2 additional receptions in this past week's game against the Saints. Now, granted, Foreman didn't really do much with his carries. He only had 30 rushing yards on 11 carries. Adrian Peterson wasn't any better, though. But he did have 2 receptions as well, including a really nice 40-yard catch and run from a screen pass. So that was good to see from Foreman. And just overall, I think we could see the Tennessee Titans moving more towards featuring D'Onta Foreman rather than Adrian Peterson as the season goes on until Derrick Henry comes back. And if that actually happens, D'Onta Foreman, I think, could be pretty valuable for fantasy as a flex spot, or a solid back end RB2, just a guy that, maybe gets 50, 60 rushing yards, maybe an extra reception or two. And then if he falls into the end zone, is giving you 14 or 15 PPR points at the end of the day. So that's pretty valuable, and it's going to be pretty solid as the remainder of the season goes on. And I think that D'Onta Foreman definitely fits the Derrick Henry skill set and archetype a lot better than Adrian Peterson. So it would make sense if the Tennessee Titans actually start focusing and featuring D'Onta Foreman moving on through the remainder of the year. Lastly, I want to talk about two wide receivers that are basically in the same situations on their two teams. And the first one I want to highlight is Marcus Johnson, the wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans, who had 15 PPR points, 5 receptions for 100 yards as the wide receiver 2 behind AJ Brown, now that Julio Jones is on the injured reserve. So I know I've highlighted another Tennessee Titans wide receiver who filled in for Julio in Nick Westbrook earlier in the year, and that didn't really actually pan out. So there is the probability that Marcus Johnson is just another random guy who just got targets this week and did well with those targets. But this also could be a possible replacement for Julio Jones and a more long-term guy in Marcus Johnson while Julio continues to be on the injured reserve for at least the next 2 weeks. Johnson, I think, could be the wide receiver 2 for the Tennessee Titans with AJ Brown. Not to mention, AJ Brown is also dealing with more injuries, it seems like, every single week, and actually was injured and left the game a little bit against the New Orleans Saints. So if both of those players in Julio and AJ Brown sit, Marcus Johnson could be the wide receiver 1 for the Titans. And it seems like, at least from this past game, he's got juice. He's got some favoritism with Ryan Tannehill. It could end up being something that sticks, or maybe not. I mean, that's entirely up to you to decide if you actually want to add Marcus Johnson or not. But that is one of the wide receivers who stood out in this past week. The other one is Olamide Zaccheaus, the wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, who had a pretty solid week this week as well, at least in terms of targets. He didn't really do much in the receiving game, turning those targets into actual production, but he led the team in targets, was tied with Kyle Pitts, had 4 more targets than Russell Gage, and then, of course, Cordero Patterson had an injury himself, so that opens up potentially some more targets in this Falcons offense that could be fed towards Zaccheaus. Like Marcus Johnson, though, this could just be another one that was just kind of like a random week. Zaccheaus got targets. It didn't really transfer and translate into production, but that could just swing right back to Russell Gage's favor like it was last week, even though last week Zaccheaus also had actually a pretty solid PPR performance because he caught 2 touchdowns. But Russell Gage last week was the main guy and the replacement for Calvin Ridley. Zaccheaus is available in over 40% of Dynasty Leagues, so if you wanted to take a shot and a stab at somebody in this Falcons offense, you could go out and grab him at a pretty reasonable price and availability in a lot of your Dynasty Leagues. If it were up to me and I had the decision between Zaccheaus and Marcus Johnson, I would probably just go towards Marcus Johnson. One, because he's available in a lot more Dynasty Leagues out there. He might be even cheaper than Olamide Zaccheaus, and I think that his path to fantasy relevance is actually a lot clearer than Zaccheaus's, because I think that there is a possibility that Marcus Johnson's performance and production is a little bit stickier than Zaccheaus's random targets and touchdowns and a lot of unpredictability there. But I think Marcus Johnson at least has a better chance of stickiness with his production and being one of Ryan Tannehill's top targets without Julio Jones. I do drop an article over on dynastyleaguefootball.com every single Monday for waiver wires that does include more players and does drop a day earlier than this video. So if you want access to more players than what was in this video a day earlier, you can sign up and become a DLF Premium subscriber and gain access to not only my article, but also all of the other amazing articles that we drop every single day, every single week by the amazing DLF team, but then also rankings, ADP, tools, the trade analyzer, trade finder, all of the amazing stuff that we have over on Dynasty League Football. You gain access to all of that by becoming a premium subscriber. And if you would like to watch a video recapping all of the Week 10 slate, you can click right up here and watch that video. And with that being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.